Hello everyone, my name is Alison Powell and I'm going to introduce the Just AI project's AlmostFutureAI. This project is a project within a project. The Just AI network has developed a holistic framework for reflecting on, developing, and speculating into the future of data and AI ethics research and practice. And our approach proceeds over three temporal positions: the recent past, which we explore by mapping the literature that's already published on data and AI ethics; the evolving present, which we in part explore by surveying who is working in the field and asking them about how they are doing their work on data and AI ethics; and the speculative future. And the project we're presenting today is an engagement with the speculative future that also connects with this idea of the recent past and the developing present of the field of data and AI ethics. In the project we're presenting today, we discuss a process through which we identified scholars who were working on key issues of data and AI ethics in the UK, and matched them up with science fiction and speculative writers who were also working in the UK. And we created these matches as a way of investigating some of the most significant issues that apply in the field of data and AI ethics. And through a series of public conversations between these researchers and the creative writers conducted on Zoom with audiences, we created a kind of reflection about the speculations that emerge from the research that's being conducted in the what we could call the emergent present. So as part of our process, we held two online salons, one in November and one in February, with our writers and with members of the research community, where we interrogated first the concepts for the stories and then the stories themselves. As a result of these salons, we were able to capture the conversations that were occurring amongst the people who have participated, and we have crafted the stories, the responses, and the overall themes into material that will soon be published in a book of stories and conversations. What we wanted to do today was to reflect on our process and also to reflect on the way that the idea of the speculative future encapsulates a kind of constantly evolving present, but it also shapes that constantly evolving present. As researchers, we are often taught to think that we are testing hypotheses, ideas about what happened in the past, and that science fiction is somehow casting a future that can never occur. In our research process, we wanted to see if we could create a kind of temporal linkage between not just what was already occurring in research, what people care about right now in the moment, particularly in this pandemic year, but also to kind of speculate an almost future, not a completely speculative far future, but a future that is close enough that it becomes a matter of concern for all kinds of people who have participated. So I'm going to hand over to my colleagues to explore more in detail about the different aspects of the project, and I really hope you enjoy our video and look forward to speaking with you soon.
Hello everyone, my name's Imre Bard and I work as a researcher in the Just AI network. Following Alison's address, I will say a little bit more about our process. And this process that led to the commissioning of 3 authors really started with some internal conversations within the team about what we might hope to accomplish with our work. And in that discussion, we came to the idea that it would be a really worthwhile outcome if our work had somehow led to the creation of a song that people would continue to sing in 100 years' time. And so we started to explore how we might actually make that a reality, and after some thinking, we arrived at the idea of inviting fiction authors to join the conversation about AI and data ethics. And our aspiration here was to prototype a process that might stretch and expand and question and rethink the ways in which ethical reflection on technology currently takes place. And we look to fiction as a way of expanding the conversation about AI and data ethics outside the confines of academia by inviting the public to contemplate and to interrogate the kinds of futures that we might be moving towards with the help of AI, but also to imagine and to think about the kinds of futures that we might actually want to move towards. And so we thought that at its core, the purpose of ethics is to create and to express something that carries an important conversation about what is valuable in the world. And since we are storytelling creatures, it felt like embedding reflection on those important values into narratives, into pieces of fiction, seems like a good strategy to try to advance the field of AI ethics itself. And so one of the core activities of our project has been to try to map the field of AI and data ethics to build an understanding of the current state of academic discussions about this topic. And we wanted to use our growing understanding of the field to create mutually enriching encounters and conversations between researchers on the one hand and fiction writers on the other. So after careful consideration, we approached 3 authors whose work draws on very different literary traditions, and we gauged their interest in being commissioned for a project like this. And so in a first session where we had some conversations, we explored the interest that the authors have in the topic so that we can match them with researchers working on related themes. Irenosen Okogie expressed an interest in exploring the ways in which the rise of AI technology might help or hinder those who experience systematic forms of racism. So we introduced Irenosen to Dr. Francesca Sobande, who's based at Cardiff University, and who works on issues related to race, gender, structural inequalities, and technology. Tanya Hirschman was interested in spirituality, religion, and what it means for an AI to be good, as well as the impacts that AI technology might have on women in particular. So we connected Tanya to Erin Young, who is a researcher at the Leverhulme Center for the Future of Intelligence, and she looks at the impact of AI on women. And we also connected Tanya to Beth Singler, who is a researcher at Cambridge University, and she looks at AI, religion, and spirituality. Adam Marek, our third author, was interested in looking at how AI might actually improve humans, our physical and mental abilities, our relationships, our decision-making capacity, how we spend our time, looking at the issue of AI and human enhancement. So we connected Adam to the Sienna project, which is an EU-funded effort that is looking to develop ethics guidelines for artificial intelligence, robotics, and human augmentation. And so Adam spoke with 2 researchers from that project, Yasmin J. Erden and Anne Reseguier. And we also connected Adam to the CEO of an AI company that is developing related technologies. So we also shared some links and some reading material with the authors in order to fuel and feed their exploration of these topics, but we really didn't want to exert any influence on their ideation and the directions in which they are taking their projects and their stories. A few weeks after the authors had been connected to the researchers, we hosted the first online evening salon where 2 authors shared their evolving ideas, and they read pieces of their works in progress. And they also reflected on the encounters that they have had with their academic interlocutors. This exchange took place in a phase where the stories were still in their formative stages, so ideas were still in flux. And so by inviting the public into a conversation, we both opened up the author's creative process, and we also provided a channel for the public's questions and concerns and expectations and anxieties to feed into the evolution of those ideas. And a particularly evocative image that emerged from this conversation was suggested by Dr. Mustafa Ali, who's a researcher at the Open University, who used the metaphor of the nuclear bread knife to illustrate the ways in which AI technology is both ubiquitous and kind of omnipresent in our lives, very easily available, yet its impacts are potentially at the scale and transformative potential of nuclear power and nuclear weapons. So 2 stories were presented a few months later at a second online event, at a second evening salon, where the authors read their final pieces and they engaged in a conversation with the public as well as with invited experts and artist practitioners. In very unique and distinct ways, both pieces grappled with the fundamental question of humanness and with the ways in which the notion of being human is unsettled by AIs as they become increasingly intimate presences in our everyday lives. At the same time, to me, they really foregrounded the difficulty of envisioning a future where humanity's growing adoption and entanglement with AI does not somehow also resemble a dystopia of some sort. Well, we really hope that this process can serve as an inspiration for others to explore new human AI futures. And I will now pass the word to Louise Hickman to share her reflections. Thank you.
Thank you, Emery, for describing the process, how we came to work with the three authors that are central to the text, AlmostFutureAI, and how then we put those authors into conversation with researchers and practitioners working in the field of AI ethics. My name is Louise Hickman. I work alongside Alison and Emery on the Just AI project, co-hosted with LSD and the Ada Lovelace Institute. In the next part, I'm going to spend roughly 5 minutes talking about the editing process and how we came to collect the stories and how we fitted them together within this standalone text. I just want to go back to paraphrase something that Alison said in introduction, which I think is a really important point, is like, how do we think about the future when we only have the tools of the present? So I think this is a really central question to this project, is like what tools we have. So that building on those tools, I'm going to draw on perhaps some of the conversation that we've been having within this project, within the text as well, to kind of build on the kind of feminist effort of bringing in like different speakers. We had the opportunity to transcribe having a transcript of the two salons that we had when we hosted the two stories by Adam and Tanya. In doing so, this provided the opportunity to curate a meta conversation or a meta commentary around the stories. And so what you have is instead of the stories, and as a reader, you read those stories and you take your own meaning away, we went for a more distributive model of reading, so like a co-readership, right? So instead of thinking about the text as simply as not necessarily a co-authorship, but you can think of that, especially when we're thinking about feedback loops and how discourse gets taken up by the discussion of AI, especially when those kind of discursive narratives are also taken up in those kind of feedback loops. So in some sense, we decided to use footnotes within the text to present the series of conversations that happened within the salon, which is a really interesting tool in itself. Because in the sense, what happened was there was a kind of shift in conversation in which how people responded to the text. So Tanya, wonderful text, has determined kind of conversations and the slipperiness of human qualities are ascribed into her writing of her piece. Whereas Adams is interesting because his text is based on personal assistance, AI personal assistance to be specific. And so our first impulse in reading, kind of approaching those texts, is thinking about the gendering of voice. But what actually happened in the salon, which is really captured in the footnotes, is actually the qualities of gendering the voice is actually more nuanced. And I was really pleased that we were able to capture this in the footnotes, in the sense that listening became a tool. So it wasn't simply listening as a kind of feminine, kind of observant, subservient assistance, but actually, which I think goes hand in hand with the kind of structure of this recording in itself. These events were recorded on Zoom. There are multiple international events unfolded during the course of this commission project, and one of those being is the pandemic, but the other being Black Lives Matter. So it was interesting to see some of the dialogue around that Black Lives Matter and around what it means to be at home for long extended time came into conversation with the actual text. So one really poignant moment within the text, particularly Tanya's, is thinking about how she works at a crisis helpline. And to work at that crisis helpline, she talked about the training. Even though she is a listener and people ring in and her role is to listen, she would also talk that she has to sound like a human. So that's a kind of really interesting kind of twist on like the human quality of listening, which in Squirrel Nation responded to this and really kind of was quite evocative in the way that it's not simply about the quality of human, like the human quality of listening, but in actual fact, it was about how we can use listening as an active tool. So, in that sense, like this time that we spend on Zoom and we're listening to others or we're reading captions of others, there's like a practice of listening. And so this is like a really just like one insight into how we can think about ways that we don't necessarily think about the kind of ethics of how to listen or how to be an active listener. And so I was pleased to see that we were able to capture a more nuanced analysis because we were presented with these tools that made us reflective. So going back to Alison's comment about how do we think about the future when we only have the tools of our present, it's really informed, this like text in itself is really informed by the moment of COVID. So I'm going to now hand it off to Alison to conclude. Thank you.
It's some time later. I want to conclude by considering how our project tried to rewrite the narratives around AI by creating a process that involved listening on many levels. Listening between experts basing their work on that which had been done in the past. Listening of our research team to these researchers and to the authors we commissioned as we discussed which kinds of narratives might inspire the deep discussions that we thought needed to happen between ourselves and others. Listening between the authors and the respondents in the salons, which we capture in our written documentation as a parallel discussion unfolding both through the texts and through footnotes that foreground what we talked about as we worked through the creation and presentation of these narratives. Much like Bruno Latour's Aramis, which is also a work of research creation grounded in speculation. And finally, listening among the public who attended our salons and asked questions that are also reflected in these footnoted discussions. As researchers, as thinkers, and as readers, we are all connected between the past and the future. Fiction, in our process, is a construction of many possibles. In the Just AI project as a whole, we draw a trajectory between the increased fascination with and intensification of AI processes that are unfolding in the present and the unknown number of speculative futures that could yet become. These include the futures sketched by the researchers we commissioned, Tanya Hirschman, Irinosin Okajie, and Adam Marek, who respectively focus on ideas of care and therapeutic listening, as Louise talked about, on the potential to recast AI futures through Black liberation, and on the notion of assistance and its extension of human capacity. These also include the futures in our own imaginations and in the imaginations of the people who contributed to, listened to, and were part of our salons and who will read or listen to our work in future, which of course includes you. Thank you very much on behalf of the entire Just AI team.